Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to another lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn about IELTS Speaking Test Part 1. We're going to learn about farming. So our topic is farming. In this lesson, we're going to look at some questions and some sample answers. I'm also going to explain to you the vocabulary I have used in the sample answers. And finally, I'm going to give you some tips to help you score a high band in your IELTS speaking test. Let's begin with question 1. Are you interested in farming? Are you interested in farming? Now, in that question, the examiner wants to know whether you find farming interesting. Now, you can answer that question by saying, sample answer 1. Yes, I do find farming quite fascinating because you get to plant seeds and see them germinate and grow into different crops. Yes, I do find farming quite fascinating because you get to plant seeds and see them germinate and grow into different crops. Now, in that answer, I told the examiner that I find farming quite fascinating. Now, the word fascinating means interesting. Fascinating means interesting because you get to plant seeds. Now, to plant seeds is to put seeds in the ground. You dig a hole, a small hole, you put the seed, and then you cover it with soil. That is planting. And then you see them germinate. After you have planted the seeds, after a few days or a few weeks, the seeds grow. They begin to grow. Now, that is what we call germinating. The seeds begin to grow and they turn into really small plants. That is after the seeds germinate. The seeds begin to grow into different crops. Now, crops are the different plants that you get after you plant seeds. For example, if you plant maize seeds, for example, or if you plant vegetables, you will get the crops. And the crops are going to be the plants that you get once the seeds germinate. Let's move on to question 2. Are there any farms near your home? Are there any farms near your home? In that question, the examiner just wants to know whether near your home, where you live, there are any farms at all. Now, you can answer that question by saying, yes, actually, my homestead is surrounded by a lot of large and small-scale farmers. Agriculture is a staple source of income in my village. Yes, actually, my homestead is surrounded by a lot of large and small-scale farmers. Agriculture is a staple source of income in my country. So in that question, I confirmed to the examiner that actually, my homestead, your homestead is your home, okay? Your homestead is your home. It is surrounded by a lot of large and small-scale farmers. Agriculture is a staple source of income in my village. Now, large and small-scale farmers. Now, we have different types of farmers. We have farmers who have a lot of land. Now, those we call large-scale farmers. And then we have farmers who have very small pieces of land where they grow their crops, and those we call small-scale farmers. The other word that I use is agriculture. Now, agriculture is farming, okay? The growing of different crops. That is agriculture. The next word I use is a staple source of income. Staple means a main source of income. Source of income is where you get your money from. It is a staple. Staple means it is one of the main sources of income. Let's move on to question 3. Why do farmers need to farm successfully? Why do farmers need to farm successfully? In that question, the examiner wants you to give him or her some reasons. Okay, what do farmers need to farm successfully? So the examiner wants you to give him or her a number of things that are very important for a farmer to be able to actually grow crops and harvest a bountiful harvest. What do farmers need to be able to farm successfully? Now you can answer question 3 by saying, sample answer 3. To grow crops successfully, farmers are reliant on rainfall, sunlight, and fertilizer in order to guarantee a bountiful harvest. To grow crops successfully, farmers are reliant on rainfall, sunlight, and fertilizer in order to guarantee a bountiful harvest. So in that answer, I identified the things that farmers need to grow, or rather to be able to farm successfully. So farmers are reliant on. Reliant on means depend on. To rely on something is to depend on something. They are reliant on. They depend on rainfall, sunlight, that is light from the sun, and fertilizer. Now, fertilizer is what farmers use to make sure that the soil is very rich, to make sure that the crops grow well and that they harvest a lot of it. Fertilizer. In order to guarantee a bountiful harvest. Bountiful simply means a good harvest. A bountiful harvest. A harvest that gives them a lot of crops. Now let's move on to question 4. Have you been to a farm? Have you been to a farm? In that question, the examiner just wants to know whether you have ever visited a farm, whether you have ever been to a farm. Now you can answer that question by saying, sample answer 4. My family does own a farm, so whenever I visit the village, I do help with tilling the land, planting of the seeds, weeding the crops, and harvesting depending on the season. My family does own a farm, so whenever I visit the village, I do help with tilling the land, planting of the seeds, weeding the crops, and harvesting depending on the season. Now in that answer, I told the examiner that actually I have been to a farm a lot, and that is because my family does own a farm. So my family has a farm. So whenever I visit, whenever means every time I visit the village, I do help with tilling the land. Tilling the land means digging the land. Planting of the seeds. Planting means putting the seeds in the ground. Weeding the crops. Weeding means that once the plants have grown, okay, sometimes you find that there are other plants around it that should not be there. That is what we call weed. Okay, weeding the crops. That means removing the crops around the plants you have planted to make sure that they do not affect the plant that you have planted. Okay, so weeds are plants that should not be in your garden. And harvesting depending on the season. To harvest is once the crops have grown, then you remove them from the ground, you remove them from the soil, and then you go and store them somewhere. That is harvesting. Now let's move on to question 5. Are farmers important? Are farmers important? Now to answer that question, you can say sample answer 5, because the examiner is asking in your opinion. The examiner wants to know whether you think farmers are important at all. Now you can answer that question by saying sample answer 5. I think farmers are very important because without them there would be a scarcity of food, which could lead to starvation and a rise in food prices. I think farmers are very important because without them, there would be a scarcity of food, which could lead to starvation and a rise in food prices. Now, in that answer, I confirmed to the examiner that I think farmers are important, and then I explained why. One, without them, there would be a scarcity of food. A scarcity of food means that there would be no food. It would be very difficult for you to find food to buy, for example. Scarcity means shortage. There would be a shortage of food. And that could lead to starvation. Starvation means that people have people are hungry, but they have no food, so they're starving. They're very, very, very hungry, but there is no food to eat. Then you can say that I'm starving, meaning that you're very hungry, but you have nothing to eat. And then the other words I use is a rise in food prices. A rise means that the food would become more expensive. The price of the food would be very high. A rise means there would be, an increment. A rise in food prices means that there would be an increment in the price of food. Now, this brings me to the second section of the lesson where I'm going to give you some tips to help you score a high band in your IELTS speaking test. Tip number 1, listen really carefully to the examiner and try to make sure that you understand the question. If you don't understand the question, you can say to the examiner, please, could you repeat the question? Please, could you repeat the question? Or you can say, could you repeat the question, please? Could you repeat the question, please? Now, there's nothing wrong with saying that. You will not lose marks. You will not get a lower band. So if you don't understand the question, ask the examiner to repeat the question, but ask that politely. Could you please repeat the question? Or could you repeat the question, please? Tip number 2, take your time to answer the question. Now, in my experience, students, sometimes they just rush. They don't take their time. It's your exam. You have paid for it, okay? So take your time, okay? Take your time to answer your questions. Are you interested in farming? Yes, I do find farming quite fascinating because you get to plant seeds and see them germinate and grow into different crops. So take your time to answer the question. Don't rush. Okay? Tip number 3 that I'm going to give you is for each of the questions that the examiner is going to ask you, don't just say yes or no. But also don't rush to give your answers, okay? Tip number 4, make sure that you use a lot of compound and complex sentences in your answers. A compound sentence has one linking word. A complex sentence has 2 or more linking words. So if you use linking words, then it means that you're using a lot of complex and compound sentences. The next tip and the most important, make sure you speak in correct grammar. Very, very important. In fact, that's what really determines your band. Make sure your tenses are correct. Make sure you have good subject-verb agreement. Make sure that your prepositions are used correctly. The next tip, use the correct vocabulary for the topic that you're talking about. In this lesson, we're talking about farming, and I have underlined for you a lot of the vocabulary that you can use to talk about farming. The next tip is try and use intonation when you're speaking, meaning that you need to raise and lower your voice depending on what it is that you're saying. And finally, try as much as possible to be fluent when you're speaking. Now, speaking fluently does not mean that you speak English without an accent. There's nothing wrong with speaking English with an accent. The most important thing is that the examiner can understand you. Now, to help improve your fluency, I'm going to read the questions and the sample answers, and you can repeat after me. Are you ready to start? Okay, let's begin. Are you interested in farming? Yes. I do find farming quite fascinating because you get to plant seeds and see them germinate and grow into different crops. Question 2. Are there any farms near your home? Yes, actually, my homestead is surrounded by a lot of large and small-scale farmers. Agriculture is a staple source of income in my village. Question 3. What do farmers need to farm successfully? To grow crops successfully, farmers are reliant on rainfall, sunlight, and fertilizer in order to guarantee a bountiful harvest. Question 4. Have you been to a farm? My family does own a farm, so whenever I visit the village, I do help with tilling the land, planting of the seeds, weeding the crops, and harvesting depending on the season. Question 5. Are farmers important? I think farmers are very important because without them there would be a scarcity of food which could lead to starvation and a rise in food prices. So there you go. That's how you're supposed to answer those questions. You have the vocabulary so you can practice, and remember, practice, 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 because practice makes perfect. The more you practice, the better you become at speaking English. Now, if you found this lesson helpful at all, please give this video a thumbs up, share the video with somebody else, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn your notification bell on so that you know when I upload a new video. Now, thank you very much, everyone, and I shall see you in our next lesson. Bye-bye.